Hey, everybody. This is Steve here again. Now, I used to refer to myself as the local idiot, and I had that as kind of like my little hook or whatever. That was my thing. But I'm using this now as a podcast for my business, and I thought it unwise to advertise that I'm an idiot for my business, which is consulting. You're not supposed to hire idiots when you consult, when you're hiring a consultant. I'm like an idiot savant, though, if it's any consolation, where that I'm an idiot in other aspects of my life, and we're gonna one day get back into that. I've gone over that for people before, but we'll do it again because I love talking about that. But my business at the moment that I'm going to be currently pursuing is a maintenance consulting thing. So maintenance on like apartment complexes of rental houses, apartment buildings, and stuff like that. And it's surprising how people don't know that much about maintenance, even when that's their job. Um, I just had another run in. I never ever have confrontations, but I just had another run in today with somebody um, that I feel really bad for. To be honest, he's between a rock and a hard place. Um, but he's fixing to quit. Either that or he's bluffing stupidly. Um, because he says that his supervisor, I mean, not his supervisor, his direct supervisor, because he is the maintenance supervisor, so it's the property manager, it has told him no to buying anything, no to spending any money. And I get that. They're way over budget, horribly over budget on everything. And that has nothing to do with well, I shouldn't say that. It doesn't have much to do with this particular maintenance supervisor. But I will say that what I've heard, everything I've heard about so far, is they're not spending enough money in the right areas, and they're spending way too much in other areas where that they shouldn't. They should be handling some of that in house, and they're so they don't know what they're doing. And I feel really bad for the manager because she's also in between a rock and a hard place. She's got some great qualifications, really smart, presents really well, but her judgment in a lot of stuff I've seen, and this has nothing to do with my wife. She has her opinion, I have mine. Is just terrible, and classic mistakes that I've seen over and over and over again. But like, the knee-jerk response that if you're over budget, stop spending money on maintenance. In fact, they even let a maintenance person go, be, not because they were performing poorly or whatever, but because they just couldn't afford them. Um, Man, I would love to have a sit down with people like that and tell them, one of the reasons that your occupancy is bad, which means that's why you can't afford stuff and you're over budget. One of the reasons for that is because your maintenance is shoddy, and the word on that kind of stuff gets around. It's a popularity contest, between one apartment complex and all the other ones in town, and the word travels fast like the grapevine kind of a thing. And when your occupancy is low, you're losing the contest. And they do what they call comp shops, which is competition shopping, just to find out what everybody else's occupancy level is, which is kind of a joke because when I did comp shops, nobody ever told you the truth. And it was our policy, which, the company policy, to never tell the truth. You would never say something ridiculous like that it was like 100%, even though it could be. But you would also never say something ridiculous like, my wife was doing a comp shop yesterday, and somebody told her that their occupancy of a neighboring complex was 80%. And I'm going to tell you right now, I have seen places that are 80%, not very much, not very often, because when a property gets to like 86%, the bank takes over, literally takes over and starts managing for you. Now, they'll have you around to try to hopefully teach you something, but they'll want to get you up to at least 86%. And the reality is, Most of them, once you get down below 89% occupancy, the bank is going to start talking to you about taking over. And at that point, that's your warning to light a fire under your ass, or you're going to have a bunch of bank people walking around your property and doing all your leasing for you and telling you what to do, like, your advertising, your maintenance, all those different things that you're not doing right. They're going to teach you how to do it right. And it's horribly embarrassing. A friend and I one time got hired to teach a sheriff's department how to fight. A long time ago when I used to have another life. And it was because that particular sheriff's department kept on shooting people and killing them for ridiculous stuff. Just because they were just afraid for anybody to touch them. And I lived in that area for quite a long time. And I knew a lot of deputies there and stuff like that. Not where I worked. I was a deputy somewhere else in training. I was in a sheriff's reserve program for 2 years. And I had an associate's degree in criminal justice, or a couple of credits shy of that. Because while I was doing it, I realized it was not a good job. It's a great job for the right people. I just wasn't the right people. It wasn't the job necessarily. It was me. But it's entirely possible to fuck up so badly at your job so that somebody else is required to come in and teach you how to do your job. How embarrassing is that? When my friend and I were teaching deputies how to use their hands to defend themselves when appropriate, as opposed to just plugging everybody. I'm sure the deputies were embarrassed. I mean, it was obvious. It was like, you could cut the tension with a knife, because just having us there, and we were hired to do that because the state found in court that the county was negligent, and the state patrol had to start following. I mean, technically, it was more the deputies following the state, but every time there came a call in, the state patrol had to show up first, and the deputies could be there. And I can't even picture what that would have been like. But when you're playing with people's lives, the law enforcement has to do what they got to do, and they're just like anybody else. Some law enforcement, like West Virginia right now, is having a huge problem with their state police. Some law enforcement is incompetent, just like some people are incompetent, just like some companies are incompetent. There are hospitals that are incompetent because of some leader that's limiting everybody, and like telling a maintenance worker at an apartment complex that they can't buy anything, that they can't spend any money, that they can't hire help for something that needs to be done, that it's not supposed to be done by a maintenance person. Maintenance people are not roofers. Anybody who has their maintenance people be roofers, either they're on a gigantic property, like down in Texas, there's one that's like, I don't know, 1,600 apartments or some dang thing like that. And they've got an army of maintenance guys. And they're like a whole town, but they're an apartment complex. Those people would have their own construction crews and all that kind of stuff. But normal apartment complexes that are under 500 apartments, they don't do their own roofing and things like that. They hire roofers for a variety of reasons, but maintenance people maintain stuff. They don't re-roof, they don't rewire, they're not licensed for it. Okay, they'll like rewiring and most plumbing and stuff like that. And every municipality is different. Some places just don't allow it. Some places make you go through all kinds of stuff. But they're spending money in maintenance is vital to keeping occupancy up. And so we're in the find out phase. We've been there. This place has been there for quite a while, and now we're going to fix it. And because there's been too much fucking around. So what I do is I teach property investor. I got hired by property investors and asset managers and people like that to come in and fix or redesign a maintenance program for a complex of any size. I can do that. And, determining how many people there need to be, and if the people that are there, if we intend to keep people, are trained well enough and have the right aptitude. And if not, then hiring has to happen, possibly firing has to happen. Um, it looks like the complex that my wife's dealing with right now is sort of taking care of itself that way. It does happen. Luckily, once in a while, you don't have to do any firing. They just all quit. And not that where we're at, there are maintenance people here that are top quality, in my opinion. But, almost all problems start at the top. And it doesn't mean the maintenance supervisor necessarily. There's people way above them that it can start at. I've discussed that before here. But so there are two maintenance techs on this property that I admire, and I would be happy to work with, and they're willing to learn. I don't think that they need to learn a lot of skills, as far as like all the different things that a maintenance person does, where it's drywall, plumbing, electrical, all those kinds of things. I don't think they need to learn a ton of that. I think that they know those things. What they basically don't know are some of the rules. I mean, maintenance guys got to follow a ton of rules to make things legal and to also make the maintenance program efficient, right? And the other thing is, you're not allowed to skimp on people. You're not allowed to leave apartments in terrible condition when they're supposed to look brand spanking new and somebody's going to be moving into there. Because when somebody from the outside sees that apartment, like sometimes people will demand to see an apartment even before it's been cleaned or something like that, before it's even been, like somebody's moved out and all their junk is still there, the apartment looks terrible and stuff like that. It's called a turn or a make ready, and it hasn't been done yet. It's a sin in the business to let somebody see that unit before it's been done. And really all they want to do is see the layout and stuff. And so I totally get that. The problem is they're never able to unsee what that apartment used to look like. And I don't know what people's expectations are or whatever, but something happens where that their expectations get violated, and they become a problem from the start if they ever even take the apartment. So it's always an absolute no. If you don't have an apartment ready to show, like one that's completely done, all the maintenance has been done to make it look brand new. The cleaners have all been in there, and so that the place looks brand spanking new. If they don't look like that, if they're not in that condition, a potential customer cannot see them. And so lots of things like that get violated, which is stuff that drives occupancy down. And so holy moly. That's what I do. I fix that. People that are not following the rules. And it's not always maintenance guys. Some of the biggest violators of that are managers and leasing agents. They're under pressure. Managers and leasing agents make bonuses and commission. And when somebody comes in that they just know would rent, but they've got to see the apartment first, and you just don't have one available, you can get creative. You can show them. You can have agreements with really good tenants, that are really just sweet and will make deals with you. I mean, who knows? I mean, I've always had people that will work with me on stuff, but it's really a lot of pressure for that leasing agent to show the apartment if that person says, I'm only going to rent, and I am going to rent if you can show me the unit. But it's a lot of pressure. And so with experience comes the ability to figure out creative ways to figure out how to make things work, without violating, absolute rules. And, like I say, it's just experience. like the maintenance supervisor that's here right now, I honestly have, I've said two words to him only because that's all I was given the opportunity to say. I was walking by him one day and I said, "Hi, how are you?" And he said, "Great, how are you?" Kind of thing. That's it. And I've seen him have the tiniest piece of a conversation, and I've heard a couple of things. He seems like an intelligent man. Uh, he probably is experienced to some degree because of his age. Um, the problem is, though, he might be experienced in maintenance, but not this maintenance. Somebody could be the maintenance guy at a factory, or the maintenance guy at a sawmill, or something like that, or the his having their own business where that they contract to do maintenance for you know everything from gas stations to supermarkets, right? And that's another great example. You could be a maintenance guy at a Walmart or at a Target store or whatever, and you would have absolutely no idea how to supervise an apartment complex. There is such a huge difference between them. I've been a maintenance guy on for big buildings and facilities, like hospital and stuff like that. And there's a huge difference. There's a lot of things that are, legal things that you need to know for like a hospital or for any other kind of factory, as opposed to property rental. And then there's a much more legal stuff to know in apartment complexes. Not just the legal stuff, but also the rules that make things work smoothly. Um, as a maintenance tech, if you have a decent manager, you're safe because the manager is going to anticipate whatever you're going to run into pretty much, and is going to work on with you over and over and over again until they're confident that you've got this. Okay, so that they're not going to be called onto the carpet later, kind of a thing. And the two maintenance guys here, they're kind of low on the totem pole here and stuff, but they're top quality. They're people that would be willing to learn, and they're old enough to give a shit about their job. And at least one of them for sure is highly skilled. When I say highly skilled, it means I know that they're an electrician. They don't just work on electrical work; they're an electrician. The other guy is at least good enough to be able to safely and competently troubleshoot, like if a receptacle is bad in a living room, or if what the problem was with a light, whether it's the switch or if it's the fixture, all that kind of stuff. Which is essentially, for the most part, what maintenance guys do for electrical work. I My LME is expired, but I used to have what's called a limited maintenance electrician license, and an electrician has to know a whole bunch of stuff about how to build a circuit. And, in a circuit, I'll give you a really simple circuit, is like power coming in, 110 power coming in. One of the legs, which is a black or white, right, goes through a switch, and the other leg just continues on. Say if it's a home run, it's just going right to a light switch, and that's it. So that's the whole circuit. It makes a loop, from the start to the light and back. And in between, there is a switch that's on one of the legs. And when the switch is thrown, it either blocks that power or it lets that power go through. And that's how the switch works. And so a lot of electrical work is really, really simple, especially when it's maintenance electrical work, because you're literally just copying what's already up there. Somebody's already done the work. But when you're building a circuit, there's the voltage and there's the amperage, and depending on what's on the circuit, your circuit can only have so many loads on it, like a light bulb or a stove or a fridge, or all kinds of things, an air conditioner, all kinds of things. And there's a whole bunch of things in an apartment and in a house where that like a refrigerator has to be a dedicated circuit. So it goes from the source, which I'm going to say the source, but it's really not, but from the breaker to the refrigerator plug-in, and back. And that's the only thing that's on there, because when a refrigerator starts up, it's got this spike of power that it needs. And so if you put anything else on there, you could probably burn your house down or whatever, you know. There's rules. That's nice. There's rules that electrical engineers have helped figure out, and they're well published. And fire marshals have to inspect fires all the time that they catch people that were clearly not an electrician building circuits. So the good news is those two people know their way around all that stuff. So, I mean, they would be easy to teach on all the other little rules without having to give them any kind of big time skills. So I was lucky enough to, and yesterday when I did a what do you call it, session or podcast or whatever it was, I talked about my history and my background and stuff. My dad was an electrician, and he trained me how to be an electrician from the time I was a little kid. And so I was already well versed in a variety of different kinds of powers, low voltage, high voltage to mid range, and the principles therein. And so when I worked at a hotel, 2 hotels, as a maintenance guy under a maintenance supervisor. He was pretty good, but he was also kind of a dick, and so he didn't really want to teach me, to be honest. I don't know. I never. At the time, I was a pretty young guy, and I didn't understand what his issue was until later. I just realized he was a bastard, typical bastard. And because I went right from there to working at the company where I got mentored by, luckily, just in the right place at the right time, by this fellow that was just a few years away from retiring. And so we made a trade, basically. I had all the energy of a young man, and he had all the knowledge of an older man. And we made a trade. I did all the running around for him I could, and he offered me a lot of experience, and I greedily took it. And for 4 years, and then he retired. I was very, very lucky for that. Timing is everything. And part of that 4 years was because, when I came to the job, I was also at the same time going to be moving. I just didn't know where yet. And somewhere else in town. And this apartment complex said, we'll hire you, and we need you to live on the property. And I was like, that's awesome, because it was a gorgeous, gorgeous brand new property. When I moved in, my building was the second one done. And so my building was done, but there was still like 11 more buildings to go. Or whatever it was, 10 more buildings to go. So the complex there was no grass. It was like dirt clods everywhere, that kind of stuff, which was, a whole other thing. And as the maintenance supervisor, I replaced a kid there that poor kid was lost. When I say a kid, he was probably 21, but he had never been taught anything about professionalism, about, soft skills, about showing up to work, about not calling your boss a bitch, that kind of stuff. Because that's how he got fired about a month after I started. He called both of our boss a bitch, and then he thought he would keep the job. I'm like, dude, let this be a lesson to you. Don't ever do that again. But he was in the wrong thing anyway, I think. Holy moly. I got a frog in my throat, I guess. And he's wearing spurs. But we were at the beginning of, my maintenance area wasn't even started yet. So the construction crew was asking me what I wanted out of a maintenance area. So I had to determine how big it was going to be, how much square footage, and what was going to be in there. Like, did there have to be built-in things like a compressor and all that kind of stuff. And then I had to do that 3 more times with these other properties, along with all the malfunctions. What I said something yesterday about punching buildings and stuff. a lot of people know this stuff, construction people and people that have maintenance experience and whatever. But when you take over a brand new property from a construction crew, there are lots of weird things like power receptacles that don't have any wire going to them. They actually they put the box and the receptacle up, and forgot to run the wire to it. And then the drywall guys just slapped up drywall, painted, called it good. And then later when Joe Schmo rents the apartment, they try to use it and there's no power, except that a person like me is supposed to catch that stuff before that happens. And so that was part of my job. And there were toilets plumbed with hot water, which is a great cleaning system, I think, or whatever. But it is weird when you open the toilet up and it's dripping condensation off of the lid. And the tank of the toilet is, you just put your hands on it, you can tell it's hot, Could you imagine the power waste of just having constant hot water in your toilet? But anyway, there were a whole bunch of those things. And my theory was that the company was scrimping on supervisors, during construction. And so guys were they were running to get things done. That's how construction is and that kind of stuff. They were running, electricians, plumbers, to get things done. And in the process, there's really experienced people around and there's very inexperienced people around. And the very inexperienced people forgot things, or they just plain old didn't have a chance to ask somebody a question they might have really wanted to ask, but there was nobody around to ask. And then later I find those things, and there were a ton of things that were wrong with that apartment complex. And then the next three, had the same. They were the same size. They were 250 units apiece, and really high end, lots of amenities and things like that. So lots of problems, right? And then I had to hire all those other maintenance guys, starting with the maintenance supervisor of each property, which means they had to have some experience. I had to be able to train them in the way that the guy that trained me wanted. His name was John, and he had been the main maintenance supervisor for the properties, all the properties that the company had owned up until that point. But it was in a different town, about 45 minutes to an hour away from us, and so he didn't have a ton of time to come down and babysit us. So I had to do it all, and I learned a lot while I was doing that. And when determining, once one apartment complex was determined how many people there had to be, the rest of them were all easy that way, obviously. But there is a formula, and it needs to be followed, because I've over and over again found out the results of violating that formula, and it's not profitable. Yeah. So, like whether violating it one way or the other, because if you have too many people there, picture what a guy makes a year, and that's a pretty damn big chunk of potential profit. If you have too many people there because somebody's a dipshit and they're not doing their job, and for some reason you've got to keep them because of what, nepotism or whatever, I don't know. Whoever's investing in that place is getting ripped off. So a maintenance supervisor and a property manager have a really big responsibility. It's almost like a fiduciary, where your responsibility is to the customer, to the investor, and you need to make sure they make as much money as possible ethically, and that's everybody's responsibility for a professional is to behave ethically. I know a whole bunch of people that claim to be a fiduciary, and when they say that word, to them that means there are no ethics. I've literally heard it defined by certain people like that what you got to do is what you got to do. I mean, that could be all kinds of stuff. If you got to whack somebody and throw them in your dumpster, I guess that's okay because, but that's not ethical. It's not legal, right? So there's a lot of business ethics that are missing in a lot of business, and that's why there are so many rules. Luckily for me, I wasn't raised by criminals or shitheads. And the military wouldn't put up with that kind of stuff. I mean, I don't know about anybody else's experience, but if you didn't do shit exactly right, when I was a kid, if you didn't call my dad sir, you could get your ass busted. If when I was in the military, if you didn't, or if when I was doing work for my dad, if I did it wrong, he would always say, "If you don't have time to do it right, when will you?" And I I used to hate that saying because I heard it in my sleep, but it hit me one day as I was a young adult, in the military. And the bottom line was, I had a guy that by this time I had a couple guys, three guys under me, and they were doing work, and I was responsible for their work, and they were, one of them for sure was just an absolute fuck up, and I electrocuted him one time. It's one of the nice things you can do in the military. It's the HR thing isn't as big, or at least it wasn't, but I was in a communications unit, and he was asleep on the job. And I walked in, and he was so far asleep that he didn't hear me walk into this mobile unit we called vans. And it was a communications unit, and my particular job was essential. And the people that were on duty had to pay attention. They had to be alert. It was supposed to be a combat job, meaning that if we didn't make sure that everything was working, when infantry or artillery units were calling in to the Air Force or whoever to, like, they need a jet to come save them, or they need artillery to land on some bad guys or whatever like that. If they weren't able to get through because my guys were being jackasses and being asleep, people would die. And we were only one cog in that what's called a signal node, in that one big thing. Anyway, I walked in on that guy being asleep. And so one of the things we had, which was kind of funny, we had this little wire. It was like a pigtail. I had these two wires like this, and it was skinned, and so they were up. And there was this little thing on the wall that I could crank that would generate its own power, and it was full regular normal power. And I just touched him with it, and zzz, and boy, I'll tell you, I thought I was like 18. I thought I killed him for a second, and then I was like, oh no. This didn't go the way I was hoping. He was on a folding chair, and he was just dead asleep. And oh my God, you'd have thought that he just got shot by a ray gun or something like that. It was awesome though. But some people just don't have the soft skills that you're supposed to learn when you're new. When you're really young, hopefully before the military, because the military is a really important job. But if somebody has the soft skills, showing up to work, bathing, once in a while so you don't stink, having, they talk about an old work ethic. Should not be old. It should be everything, whatever. But if you're given a task, do it. Don't fall asleep at work, because you need to be alert, Some jobs are more important that way than others, and I suppose I can understand some people sleeping at work, but not at that job. All those kinds of things. I can teach a skill, but the soft skills are things you're supposed to know before you're starting to shave, And maintenance guys are kind of the same way. I've met a ton of them that, I mean, like this maintenance supervisor. I'm sure that he has the soft skills. Nobody gets to my age, and which is probably his age, or maybe he's a little older. Nobody gets there without the soft skills, I think, generally, unless you're some kind of crazy dope addict or whatever. It's hard to teach somebody real skills if they don't even possess the soft skills, because one of the soft skills, which is the desire to do a good job, and self-regulation and stuff like that, is an essential to learning, from people like me that are willing to teach. But the nice thing is, to being somebody like me in my position, if you're not willing to learn, I'll bounce your ass. That's easy, because I don't have time for that, And I know companies now, it's really common now where so many companies, they are not willing to fire people. They're terrified of it, in fact. I guess I've not learned that lesson somehow. I've not witnessed a situation where somebody was successfully able to sue over somebody getting fired. And I don't mean, inappropriate, ridiculous stuff. But I mean, when somebody's doing the wrong thing and you try to teach them and they still refuse, and it's not a question of they're just dumb, but they refuse. And then eventually you've got to write them up, which is a verbal written warning. I love how they call it a verbal. It's not a verbal, it's written down. And there's a date on it, and the exact conversation is recorded or written down as verbatim as possible by the supervisor. And just to be reasonable. And then it happens again. Now, if it's a ridiculous thing that there's just no way it could be accepted, like stealing or who knows what, that's the kind of stuff people get fired on the spot for. And that's a perfectly reasonable cause for getting fired like that. But once you've tried 2 or 3 times with somebody and they just continue to, even if it is stupidity, there are some jobs that people are just not capable of doing because their special needs are close enough to where that they need to have something else, something easier, something less complex. If I could not get a job as an accountant. I suck at math. Everything I do with math has to be on a calculator or on my computer or whatever. So, I mean, I'm not claiming to be special. I can do all the maintenance that anybody can need me to do, but I am not a mathematician. Electricians, when they're building a circuit, they use algebra to build a circuit, a complex circuit like electronics. I have something called dyscalculia. My brain will not allow me to process certain kinds of math. And so I can do algebra on my computer, on my scientific calculator. I cannot remember the process for doing it by hand. It didn't matter how many times I was shown in school. I've had to take 3 different algebra classes. And the only reason I even got through them is because I was able to learn the next day's work enough to go through the next day. And then I would work hard. And so all my homework was always done. And then when it came time to take a final, I would blow that badly. But I would always have enough extra credit because I was a hard worker. And I took every opportunity to get extra credit. And almost all the instructors would say, listen, if you do all the homework, you're going to pass. Because they were confident that if somebody did all the homework, that they would learn that. And, of course, in my situation, I always knew there was something wrong with me with math until I was about 50 and I was going to see a neurologist about something else. And I said, hey, listen, I've always had a math problem, and I've read about this thing called dyscalculia. Can you test me for that? And he asked me a bunch of questions, and he said, I don't need to test you. He said, you have dyscalculia. And I'm like, thought so. So I'm not a math whiz, and there's a ton of jobs that I can't do because of that. Simply can't do. Luckily, me having to be an accountant would just be a death sentence. So I know that, and so I would never do it. I would hate my life. I would probably help myself, stop being an accountant that way. But so I've always, I've had to really do a lot of education stuff, way more than most people would have to, because I have to redo and redo and redo stuff. I'm not naturally stupid. In fact, in some ways, I have some abilities, but math is not one of them. I have this weird ability, kind of like a Rain Man kind of a thing, where that I can see large numbers in a general term and be real close. And it's good for a business thing, like when you're talking about economics and things like that. I can really estimate far into the future on stuff, and it's really helped me in different jobs. So you got to know your strengths, but you really got to know your weaknesses and admit them to yourself. And I don't mind admitting them to everybody else too, because I've never withered in front of somebody else's greatness because I felt embarrassed or whatever. I've felt embarrassed my entire life about my shortcomings. At the same time, there's nothing I can do about them but just continue to try. And the only person that has ever failed in their life is the one that stops trying. And I was never that, at least, right? And so I don't have anything to be ashamed of, and, everybody has their strengths. Everybody has their gifts, and I have my strengths and I have gifts. Um, it's important to be able to admit those. That way you can work in your strength areas, use your gifts, and don't be a jackass and teach people how to do what you know how to do, whatever that is. And then stay the hell out of stuff that you shouldn't be doing. Let other people have those jobs and don't bullshit people, because there's been plenty of times I could have gotten jobs where that somebody needed me to be able to be this other person. And I could have faked it till I made it, kind of a thing. And, in the end, I would have been doing the job that they were looking for me to do half-assed, and they would have been wondering all that time. And I might have even succeeded at it just because of being a knuckleheaded, hard worker. Um, there's ways to get around certain kinds of math by doing really long kinds of math. I used to fight that, and I've learned to not do that a long time ago. But in my thing, I'm kind of an efficiency guy. Okay, if somebody's not running the show right, it can be chaotic. It can be really messy, and the profits come from somebody that knows what they're doing, and not just knows what they're doing, can guide other people, you know, in a way that they can still be happy and do a better job and waste less stuff. And the right people are doing the right job, like, who's getting hired, that kind of stuff. So that's all I want to do on my job stuff today. That's been forever. So yeah, it's almost 45 minutes. So I'm trying to get in the habit of making shorter videos, because it used to be well over an hour. Yesterday's was almost an hour. Today's I would like to do before 45 minutes, which is I got just a few minutes. So for my business, I'm going to, I still have to write down what's called SOPs, and they're really standard procedures in the maintenance thing, and it's things that not only I need to know, it's things that I need to be able to teach. And so I got to write books and books of SOPs, and so that I can basically, and then get them copied, and so that I can disseminate those things to people that I'm getting paid to teach, and so my job's going to be basically to go in, do the checklist that I'm going to have to design also, because I don't know of one that exists now, to be able to give these owners and investors an exact idea of what they need, and that's how you can give them an idea of what it's going to cost. That's also self-promoting, because I can also easily find out what they've been paying. And that's when you find out what their profit and loss statement is going to look like. That's when you find out what their investment's been paying them versus what it should be paying them. Okay, that stuff's all really predictable. And I didn't just learn that this way, but during when I was doing my MBA during COVID and stuff, that's one of the things I learned, how easy that was to do, to find out what something should be, and then find out what it has been, and then show them where you can save them. And for investors, it could be they might have to go bankrupt and lose their entire investment, which is just tragic. Because some people really rely on that. That's their income. That's their life. That's their retirement. Who knows? So anyway, I can fix that. I can make it to, I have one expertise really, and that is property maintenance. I can fix their maintenance program, because it's, in my opinion, besides liability, where you get sued for stuff, the maintenance program has the most potential to cost more money and to ruin your profit margin, ruin it, to take it from something that could be pretty sweet and to make it to where that it's a joke. And it's not even a good joke. It's the kind of joke where you're putting in all kinds of effort, but you're not getting anything out of it, you know? And so I can fix that. Um, but, I learned from a good guy. My dad was as I told you, a maintenance guy. He'd been on submarines for 12 years in the Navy, and as what's called an ice seaman, and it's an interior communications. And so it was all electronics. It was all having to make sure everybody doing anything electrical, which is everything on a submarine, um, were able to communicate with each other. And he had a bunch of guys under him that were basically going all over the boat all the time and working on circuits and components and stuff like that. And so he had to get really good at it. Submarines are all electrical. I mean, whether they have diesel generators that run batteries, that charge batteries, and the batteries are what runs their propellers, right? The motors. Or if it's nuclear, which is then the nuclear power runs generators uh, with steam, and those generators charge those batteries, and those batteries power the motors on the propellers, and that's how that works. So, I mean, being an ET, which is an electrical technician, or being an ICMan, which is interior communications, was a big deal. I mean, it's like only everything on a submarine, and it was always life or death. And he unfortunately got the truest. Everybody knew how dangerous it was to work on submarines because, in the 60s, when my dad's last submarine duty took place, um, everybody back then knew about a zillion submarines that vanished during World War II, and so there had been a lot of people killed on submarines at that time. So it was really obvious how dangerous they were. My father's last submarine was the USS Scorpion, and the USS Scorpion was sunk by the Russians, but not a Russian submarine. It was sunk because a trader, an American trader, I think in the FBI, I'm not positive, it might be the wrong one, Aldrich James maybe, but anyway, he sold secrets to the Russians, Soviet Union, and they learned a code and how to read a code that we were using. And when the USS Scorpion's captain sent a code in to Washington, D.C., to the Chief of Naval Operations with their itinerary, their schedule, they knew then when the next time they were going to surface was, to make a communication, and where. And they had a special helicopter waiting with a torpedo on the bottom of it. So a submarine can't hear a helicopter. They can hear a boat, they can hear a submarine, they can hear anything in the water, whales, but they can't hear helicopters. And so it's unfair. But it didn't matter. The Soviets didn't give a shit. And, I mean, we would have done the same thing to them if we were at war with them. It was the Cold War. They thought that we were responsible for sinking K-19, I believe. And we weren't. And I've got proof of that, but we weren't. And so they took revenge on us for what they believed was an attack during the Cold War, and which killed a ton of sailors, Russian sailors. And that helicopter was in the right place at the right time when the submarine popped up with its antenna to send a message, a brief message. The Soviets dropped that torpedo and hit that boat and killed 99 men, American sailors, in 1968. My father and one other sailor had gotten off the boat, and I've told this story before, but I'm going to tell it again. Had gotten off the boat 2 days before that. And I heard the story my entire life that the other sailor was put off the boat because his wife had a miscarriage back at home, and that he was basically going ballistic. I mean, losing his shit because he had to get home to his wife, and he was seriously becoming a danger on the boat, and so he had to get off. And then my father told this story my whole life, my whole 19 years of it, that he was alive. that he was sick. He was throwing up blood, and they thought he had tuberculosis. That was all a lie, but it was a cover story, an official cover story. But it was uncovered by people many years later, and then I confirmed it with people I knew that he was actually a courier with the Naval Security Group, and he was bringing a hand-delivered message from the captain to the Chief of Naval Operations in Washington. That's why those 2 sailors survived that attack. The rest of the entire crew, which was 99 men, died. That's that story. That shaped my entire life. It took 1 year, basically, I guess, for them to find the boat. So it could, I don't know, must not have, I don't know when it sank, but they said it took almost a year to find the boat, because the day I was born was the day they found the boat. And I was born on Halloween of '68. So today's my birthday. 57, in case you didn't know, today. My wife is a month and 3 weeks older than me, which I always tease her that she's a cougar. But, she's not a cougar. She's only a little bit older than me, and she doesn't look like it. She doesn't look like she's as old as me, I think. But that's the way it is. I'm going to end it now. Not the bad way, don't worry. Just this, because I went over my 45 minutes already, but I am not going to go to an hour. So I hope you guys have a great day. Have a great Halloween party, whatever you got to do. Drink some shots on me. I'm not paying for it. I mean, you could, metaphorically, I wish I could buy them for you. The thought's there. The thought's what counts, they say. So I'm thinking that. So enjoy your Halloween. I'm going to have a good birthday. I'm in the southern Louisiana area. There's no way not to have a good birthday. Hey! Yeah. You never know. We might go to New Orleans tonight. I have no idea. So I'm in Baton Rouge. Takes less than an hour to get there. So all the people that see this, stay cool.